parents who don't know what those bionic looking leg things are, or that little Bluetooth thing in the head. And I'm a little bit too shy to go up and ask him. Maybe it would be rude, but maybe if I can sit down and read a book with my kids, and I can learn and we can have a conversation. And then the next time that we see somebody with some walking aids or some hearing aids or from a different culture, then we can maybe sit down and have a conversation. Or we can look and say, oh yeah, that's a cochlear implant, and that allows that person to hear and communicate.
Yes, totally. Yeah. Exactly.
Hey, we're talking here, I'm familiar with cochlear implants. Obviously you are. And I think, 9 minutes into this, we've been talking like we assume that everybody else out there knows what they are. So can you give us a little kind of basic rundown about cochlear implants and how they're different than typical hearing aids and how they work?
Yeah, cochlear implants, that's the other thing. Some people think they're just hearing aids, and they're not. So cochlear implants, actually, there's a part of the implant that's implanted. That's why it's called an implant in the person. Adults have them too in the person's head. Hearing aids, they're like eyeglasses. You take them on and off. Now, similarly, hearing aids and cochlear implants are both electronics, right? So like your phone, like you don't want it dropped in water, etc. You have to protect it from rain. So it's a little bit of a pain in that sense. So there are some parallels. But hearing aids, a major difference is hearing aids just amplify sound. So they make sound louder. Cochlear implants actually take sound and manipulate it through a little computer that's part of the cochlear implant and helps process that sound to kind of like the way telephones do, if you imagine telephones, or radio stations, radio waves and sending sound over, wires. The cochlear implant does that. So it takes sound from the environment and then translates that. And then that is sent, stimulated to nerves in the person's head. And then the person's brain then interprets those signals, then as sound. And so it's really, I think, like a medical miracle. And when you read about the development of cochlear implants, it's just amazing because people really said this is impossible to recreate. It's actually recreating a sense. And I will also say that I think it's important for me to say this because there's also the capital D deaf community that for a long time, and maybe less so now, but still maybe a little bit now, was against cochlear implants. And the reason for that is because the capital D deaf community considers deafness to not be any sort of disability at all. And at the height of the controversy, considered parents like me, someone with typical hearing who has a child who is deaf. And that actually, as a statistic, that happens 90% of the time. Actually, deaf children are born into, families with typical hearing, with no one else deaf, and that's like our family. And the controversy is that, if you correct deafness, then maybe you're sort of wiping deafness away from the world. And that's not my intent. It wasn't my intent. And I understand that sort of feeling of being against it. But I also think that when the capital D deaf community, they primarily communicate through signed language. So in the U.S., it's American Sign Language. And you'll hear stories about that the capital D deaf community, when to deaf parents who use sign language to communicate, if they have a child who is also deaf, they celebrate, like, oh, meaning that it's not a disability. But I think they celebrate because it's sort of like, oh, you are the same as me. Your vertical identity is the same. I'm deaf, you're deaf. We are going to have the same language. And I think that language is a huge part of identity oftentimes. And that's what the deaf community with the capital D was against, that I'm trying to change my son's identity. And what I would say is I was never trying to change his identity. And I'm not trying to wipe deafness away from the world. My son is still deaf. And I tell him that he is, because as soon as he takes the cochlear implants off, or if they lose power, he cannot hear. And so, but I think what I want to emphasize is that we wanted to be able to communicate with him, and we don't know any sort of sign language. And so while the most important thing, and I recognize that, is for a child to get exposure to a language, when the capital D deaf community says that a parent like me is depriving my child of sign language, by trying to have him have a spoken language, and the problem is the only language I know is spoken language. So how would I, as his mom, be able to communicate with him primarily in sign language? I can try to learn it, but then I feel like that's dumbing down the true language that, say, American Sign Language or other sign languages are. I can't learn it in a month, and communicate with my child. So then actually, there was a little bit of time where they thought that someone like me should actually give my child up for adoption to, a capital D deaf family or something like that. And I was like, but this is my child. And I've thought about this a lot, and I don't have the right thing to say about it, I don't think. But I just want to say that this wasn't about trying to change my son's identity. It was really about communication. When we chose to give him the cochlear implants, and today he's happy he has them. So I'm glad, and I don't force him to wear them. He does not actually wear them all the time. So, and we're trying to slowly learn sign language. So there's a lot of nuance to the whole cochlear implant story. And so when I say it's a medical miracle, I don't want people to come away with thinking that, oh, all deaf people, all they need to do is get a cochlear implant. Because I think that is also sort of an ableist view that I don't actually endorse, and I don't want to come across as seeming to say that with either the picture book or with this podcast.
Yeah. Well, as I'm sitting here speaking to you, and I have the advantage of being able to see you, and what's very clear to me is that you have a deep, deep love for your son. And what's also very clear to me is that you have an equally deep respect, not only for people in the deaf community, but for all people. And you have gone out of your way to be inclusive and to kind of celebrate their feelings and be respectful of their feelings. So, and I think that's the best we can do, because we're human and we can't get inside somebody else's head. We can barely walk in somebody else's shoes, but we certainly can't get inside their head and their feelings. And one of the things that you said early on that I wanted to go back to touch on, and you just kind of mentioned it, is your son has the ability to shut off the cochlear implants and to get into that world of silence. Can you talk a little bit about that and why you think that that's an advantage for him?
Yeah. So, I think that I in this way, I really do think that capital D deaf community is right. That hearing people, we are losing out by not being able to go into true silence. So my son, even when he was younger and he'd be angry with me, so he has bilateral cochlear implants, meaning he has them on both sides. And so there's a magnet part where literally he does have a magnet, one side of the magnet's implanted underneath his skin, and then part of the cochlear implant, there's just an external magnet then that sort of just, magnetizes and just snaps kind of, onto the magnet that's underneath his skin. So that magnet needs to be, on, the magnets need to be on his head. As soon as he pops that magnet, either, both of them off, if one side is on, he still hears from that one side. But if he pops both of the magnets off his head, he can't hear. And so he knew, right? It's like kids are smart. He knew this from, when he's 2 and he gets them. And as soon as he knew he'd be in trouble, or if he would see my face and think, uh-oh, I don't want to hear what she's about to say, he would just flick those magnets off his head. Yeah, he does it to this day. He sees my face. He just takes them off. Now he'll just take them off and put them on the table. And sometimes if he's angry with me too, he'll look at me and be like, what are you going to do now? Kind of thing. Or if he's just trying to act like, I'm just going into my silent mode. He just looks down. So, he'll do that. But so that's sort of, kind of a funny thing that we have between us. But really I don't know what it's like. So I just know from him. And, but he's always, even from when he was younger, I realized it seemed very peaceful for him. When he was, a toddler, I couldn't really, he probably didn't really have the words to really transmit. And I think for a long time, he didn't really, kids when they're kids, they don't really know that they're adults, this is true for adults too. Mm. We don't really recognize how different our own experience is from the person next to us, right? Mm-hmm. So I think he thought that I should know, what it's like and why am I asking him, so, but now he's 13 and especially I think the process of writing the book together, we talked about it, now and again. And he just says it's peaceful and it's hard for him to describe. I don't know that it's something that is really describable.
Right. I'm thinking, I'm trying to make a comparison. I'm like, I have these noise canceling headphones and I love putting them on because especially on an airplane, it really is quiet, but it's not silent. And so we don't know. And so that's, we've talked here. We had Mia Armstrong on, who is a 12-year-old with Down syndrome. And she was like, Down syndrome is my superpower. And we've had people with dyslexia say similar things. And I actually think that's a really healthy attitude to take. And it sounds like that's something that your son appreciates, is that he can go into this world of silence that so many of us try to attain through meditation and yoga and breath work and whatnot. So who are we to judge? I think let's stop judging and just hang out together, get to know each other, and love each other.
I agree. I think to stay curious, I think, is one of the most important things.
I like that. Stay curious. That's a great prescription. And you're a doctor, so we should listen to you. So, hey, listen, Christine, where can we go to find out more about Sound Switch Wonder, find out more about you, and find out more about your son? He's a very handsome young man.
Oh, thanks. Well, the book has a website. It's just soundswitchwonder.com. It's also on Amazon. It's in some bookstores. It's on, Goodreads and whatever. I have my own website. It's christinejco.com. That has some more information if you want.
We've had a really great time speaking to the co-author of Sound Switch Wonder. She wrote this book with her son, Owen. Our guest has been Dr. Christine Coe. Hey, Dr. Christine, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much, Jed. I really enjoyed it.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Reading with Your Kids and will join us for the next exciting episode of the show. Hey, please be sure to connect with us on social media. We love connecting with our listeners on social media. Facebook.com/readingwithyourkids, at Reading With Your Kids on Instagram and TikTok, at Jedley Magic on Twitter. And please be sure to subscribe to our Reading With Your Kids channel over on YouTube. Right now, that is the place where you can find the Reading With Your Kids show. You can listen to all the episodes of the show that are up there. And you can also find our 2 spin-off projects, Drawing With Your Kids, a great way to bond with your kids, sitting down, learning how to draw characters from some of the great books